In this lecture, we shall discuss primarily the philosophy of David Hume. Hume, 1711 to 1776, was one of the most popular in his time philosophers, and he also exercised an influence on philosophy in general, but many thinkers after him. Hume's philosophy, if taken seriously, leads inevitably to complete collapse of any sort of true insights and true knowledge. And it ends up in very disorganized skepticism. According to David Hume, all that we know to orient ourselves in this world are sense data, sense experiences, colors, shapes, and so on. Those impressions which we get through our senses. Now, of course, our senses are limited in number, and there is no contradiction in assuming that perhaps man could have, say, instead of 5 senses, the traditional 5 senses, he could have, let's say, 20 or so. And the vision of the universe may be influenced and modified if we had other senses. But the fact is that we have 5 senses. For Hume, all we know, all we can, in a way, in a manner of speaking, understand are sense experiences, the sense data. Nothing else really is given to us. Hume was one, probably, if not the most radical empiricist in the sense of sensism. Sense data only are given. All the rest, all our beliefs, all the so-called fundamental ideas in traditional philosophy in Humean interpretation are simply unjustifiable assumptions which help us in the process of survival. However, all those basic fundamental beliefs can by no means be justified. Not by experience, because then we have only senses, neither by reasoning. And according to Hume, those are the only possibilities open to us. Sticking to the basic principle and basic idea, the fundamental, essential belief of David Hume, that sense data only exist for us, he try to undermine, number one, the existence of causation and the rationality of the process of induction. Induction, which is, as we know, used primarily in science, in modern science. Next, number two, he undermined the existence of the external world and the continuous independent existence of bodies identical with us in the external world. In other words, we assume, according to Hume, that other bodies, stable bodies, exist. They have an independent existence, and therefore we accept them as parts of the external world. And number three, in human philosophy, the existence of permanent self cannot be justified. It also belongs to the category of the deceptions, deceived, illusory ideas, and accepted for the purposes of orientation in the environment. But none of the three just mentioned can be really justified in any way, including reason. We do, of course, invariably, universally hold these beliefs. They are the foundations of our thought, they help us in the process of survival. However, the holding of these beliefs, believing those things, cannot be truly accountable, and there cannot be any sufficient rational grounds for them. Hume, of course, does not think that people will stop believing the mentioned basic fundamental concepts. According to him, they are part of our makeup. They're, so to speak, inscribed, to use a picturesque word, they are inscribed in the very nature of man. It's because man is man, that's why he holds those ideas. Not because they can be rationally justified or in any other way justified whatsoever. According to Hume, science of nature, of human nature, points that the way we come to form these beliefs is the same kind of way as other animals form their beliefs. Therefore, we may assume that animals have a sort of reason, of animal reason. Now, as already noticed, the existence of causation, the rationality of logic in the process of induction, the existence of the external world, and permanence of bodies of this world, and the existence and permanence of the human self are fundamental in any solid philosophical inquiry. If we simply unjustifiably assume, for example, that there exist causes, that there is some stability in the bodies, and that we have, and we are, in a manner of speaking, permanent selves, then of course there is not much left. If we reject causation, for example, we come to the conclusion that bodies are not acting one on another. There is no mutual influence between one body and another. In metaphysics, of course, fundamental belief in causation points to the primary, first, absolute, first cause, going back to Aristotle, Aquinas, the medieval thinkers, until modern times, Descartes included, and contemporary neo-Thomists. Hume says that we believe that causes exist, that things act on another. However, what we observe is nothing else but a sequence of sense impressions, and causation is developing in human minds because this sequence of sense impressions is by imagination joined into solid bodies acting on each other. The reason why we have those notions are grounded in the fact of spatial and temporal contiguity. One impression is immediately replaced by another. Next, temporal priority. The cause is always first in time, in Humean interpretation. And the necessary connection between cause and effect. But once again, Hume insists that we actually do not have any discovery of any causes. We only have a rapid sequence of sense data, impressions. That's all there is. It is our imagination which is fabricating the idea of cause and causality in general in this world. Next, we cannot justify the existence of the external universe, of the world. Why? Because we never have, again, anything else but sense data. Sense data only give me what they are, sense data, and nothing else. But the existence of the universe, the existence of a world, is not given in sense experience. All we have is the givens by our five senses, nothing else. To affirm that there is a universe existing, that there is a real world, is simply jumping unjustifiably to conclusion. There is an outside universe. However, this is not, according to Hume again, given in sense experience, because all whatever I get in this world is sense data, nothing else. I do not get existence of any sort. And finally, the logical method which we call induction, used by sciences until this very day, is, according to Hume again, unjustified. What we are given is a basic facts, some basic facts given in direct experience. If, let's say, all A's are B's, this is the first premise, then wherever there will be a B, there necessarily will be an A, there necessarily will be a B. But Hume says this is unjustified. We only are given experienced already A's and sequel of the B's. But we never know whether the next A will be also followed by a new B or not. Perhaps it will not. We simply don't know. So the assumption of inductive logic is again unjustified according to the Humean thinking. So, coming to our next point, what about the existence of the self? Again, we believe that we exist for a time. We say he is 56, this one is 23, I exist in so many years, and so on. We assume that we have a self, that we are selves. There is the I, go. I, the Cartesian I think, therefore I am. And in normal language, everyday language, this is assumed, of course, and no one is questioning it. However, according to Hume, this is also a mistaken idea, because no matter how much I look for myself, he says, for the self in reflection, and for my personal identity, persisting in time, I can never discover the self, no matter how much time I spend trying to catch, so to speak, myself. We do not perceive anything corresponding to the permanent self. or any sort of spiritual substance in which perceptions inhere. We only have particular fleeting perceptions themselves and nothing else. So within the Humean frame, the self is an illusion. What is given is only a flux of sense data. But even in self-reflection, so to speak, when we recollect and we try mentally, so to speak, catch our own selves, this is futile. There is, therefore, no permanent self. The idea and the belief in permanent self is useful only insofar as it helps in our everyday fight for survival. But it cannot be justified in any rational way. The Humean approach to reality is fundamentally turning around one basic idea. Nothing is given to me but only and only, generally speaking, the material of thought, so to speak, are nothing else but sense data, and what we call ideas are faint copies of vivid sense impressions which we already have. So what we call idea is a faint, weaker copy in our imagination of the formerly perceived sense datum, sense perception. This is the gist and the fundamental assumption in David Hume's philosophy. And it requires very little reflection to realize that here David Hume is wrong. My ideas are not faint copies, so to speak, of sense data perceived before, of perceptions before, I had before. Because then it would follow that when I think, let's say, about a toothache, my concept of a toothache should produce some toothache in me. Perhaps fainter, but I should feel toothache. If I talk about some pain, let's say when I think about headache, I should also feel headache. Maybe weaker way, but still I should feel it. Now we know that this is simply not the case. Here, David Hume went wrong. We may have concepts and ideas, sometimes very complicated, and not coming from sense experience alone. Consequently, since this is the fundamental assumption of David Hume, and it is erroneous. The whole philosophy, the Humean skeptical sensism, radical empirism if you like, simply has no fundamental solid roots. The question, of course, comes whether we can conceive at any time whatsoever necessity in reality. Do we discover necessity in reality? For example, we say that every effect must have a cause, and this is necessary. It cannot be otherwise. If something is an effect, this effect comes and is caused. In other words, it is produced by some other agent which we call cause. Causality is a pervasive characteristic of the world, the universe. Now, it is therefore necessity in our thought. The necessity is not given in sense data, of course, because the assumption of Hume is that nothing is given in sense data, but barely and only sense data, which are constantly fleeting. There is nothing stable, so to speak, in this world. Here, Hume is listening to the pre-Socratic Heraclitus of Ephesus. We remember that Heraclitus believed that there is nothing is stable, analogically to the beliefs of Hume, but all is in flux. All is running, so to speak. In modern times, some psychologists also did not accept consciousness, but stream of consciousness. And of course, the idea of stream already contains in itself flowing, movement, the opposite of something stable, not to talk about something necessary. Humean acceptance of the fact in his mind that only sense data are there, that those sense data are conjoined or not conjoined, they are constantly moving, and they are the source of our unjustifiable beliefs, is an assumption from the very start. For Hume, nothing is there but sense data. And once we make such an assumption, then naturally thought, reflection, discovery of truth, all those fundamentals in philosophy through centuries are already discarded, are gone. The second thing to notice when we talk about Hume is that Hume is denying the existence of permanent self without any justification himself. Because he says, I only perceive. I have only a series of sense perception. Now, if we think about this, what is it that has the perceptions? This is a very crucial question, showing the fragility of Humean thinking. If there is perception, then there must be what? A perceiver. If I talk about perceiving, there must be this or that or whatever, the subject, which is perceiving, because otherwise the word perception has no meaning whatsoever. It is an empty word. We would then have to say there is thinking, but there is no thinker. There is reflecting, but there is no reflector. There is perceiving, but there is no perceiver. There is an understanding, but there is not the one who understands. And this, of course, collapses into meaningless statements. Because thinking is not something floating in the air, so to speak, freely, and materializing at some point in perceptions. Thinking is real because there are selves that are able to think. Perception is real because there are perceivers which receive, which have, which are given sense perceptions. Therefore, we must take a very serious look and critically evaluate the radical empiricistic views of David Hume. Hume at least seemed to be somehow serious about his philosophy. On the other hand, he himself confessed that it is so terrible and so disheartening that he goes to another room, plays backgammon, talks to people in society and so on. So it is a puzzling situation. The permanence which we attribute to things existing is not imposed by me on things. I discover the hardness of a piece of rock, and the hardness is simply characteristic of the rock which is there. When I feel the coldness of the wind, it's not because I just happen to have feeling of cold wind pushing at me. There is real wind, or else I would have no feelings of cold push of the wind against me. when I touch a human being, I am not touching sense perceptions. I am actually touching a living, talking, feeling, acting, moving, speaking, human being there, present to me. Humean skepticism and sensism shows very well the great gap which took place between the philosophy of, say, Aristotle, Plato, Aristotle, Aquinas, and the fascination with sense data alone. The philosophy, let's say, in which Thomas Aquinas is proving through his famous 5 ways the existence of an absolute, philosophically speaking, absolute first mover, first cause, first orderer, and so on, stems from the fact that the central idea, the central foundation, the central foundational fact in Thomistic philosophy is being. According to Thomas, being is this that first falls into the intellect. Being means something is. There is actual existence of some kind or other. And being is primarily the first datum of our existence, our experience, and our knowledge. And this concept of being as fundamental discovery of being, is built the whole philosophy of Thomas to a great extent, yes, borrowed also from Aristotle, the disciple of Plato, and so on. So, it all depends on where is or what is the primary fundamental given. In my knowledge, and where knowledge begins, with what primary given knowledge begins. Knowledge starts building up, so to speak. This gap, of course, is very wide, and it cannot be reconciled. Thomas Aquinas, the Aristotelians or Neo-Thomists, do not deny that our senses are necessary in order that knowledge begin at all. But the senses are actually occasions, first givens, in a sense that they trigger the active agency of the human mind. The mind is triggered by senses to analyze what being, what kind of reality is given there. And from there, we start the building up the basic fundamental principles of knowledge. The mind is not just passive tabula rasa as Locke wanted it to be. The mind is a receiver but also an active analyzer, so to speak. This is a very easy thing to realize. It simply is a trivial fact observing, let's say, small children. The mind of a child is just beginning to develop, to grow. And as every mother knows, the child will have always a number of questions. Why is this? Why should I do this? What is this? Why did he do this? And so on. And the mother answers according to her abilities, or comes to a point when she simply doesn't know how to answer, because her development, her store of knowledge, so to speak, is limited too. But the fact that we have all those questionings, why, what for, because of why, because of what, who, what, where, and so on, is a sign that my mind, our minds, are not passive receptors, just absorbing, so to speak, the sense impressions, but analyzers, and by analysis reaching the very nature of things. And once this reaching of the nature of things is given, with it also comes the idea of necessity. Our concepts are universal. This is very important to remember. Some modern philosophers deny even this. Hume, of course, denies it too. When I have an idea of, let's say, a dog, I have an idea not only of the dog my neighbor has, the dog I see in the street walking, the German shepherd, or the Alaskan husky, or whatever. It applies to each one of those dogs actually visible, tangible there, living. The idea of a dog is not taken as one single, pointing to one single thing, one single object. It is universal. The word universal means covering a whole class of entities. When we say in the traditional deductive syllogism, all men are mortal, the first premise in any deductive syllogism begins with the all men are mortal. Let's say I have a concept of mortality, meaning that whatever is alive, including humans, has only a temporal living existence. There comes an end. This end we say mortal, meaning under the necessity of dying. And I know that my concept of man involves, by the very nature of being human, the fact of man's mortality. If anyone is a human man, as a man, it is absolutely certain that one day or other he will die. This necessity comes from the insight into the very nature of a human being. All men are mortal. This premise is the fact of discovery. In the process of experience and life, we discover that it is in the very nature of man, by analyzing what is human being, that it is living, material, and so on object. Man must die, like all other things which we call living, also must die. There is an inner necessity in this statement, are mortal. If they are men, they are mortal. Consequently, this premise necessarily involves the fact that Socrates is mortal. Since we know that Socrates is man, he is included already, logically, in the first premise of mortality. And we have an absolute necessary conclusion. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. This necessity comes from, as it's been already mentioned, from the basic premise, the basic foundation, the fundamental insight from which a philosophy, let's say of Thomas Aquinas or Aristotle, begins. There is being, there is some reality. Being is what is real. Being is an actual existent. It exercises the act of being. It is infinitely above nothingness. Being, therefore, the concept, the notion of being, if analyzed carefully, contains some aspects of necessity, like it was visible in analysis of the mentioned here deductive syllogism. Now we also know that science, on the other hand, uses not only deductive thinking, but to a great extent is based on special way its own way, so to speak, of thinking in its discoveries, development of scientific hypotheses and theories. And it is called induction. But induction too has a little bit less absolute certainty, because induction is based on the fact of experience, and science deals with experience first, until then building those theories. We have set, so let's say 99% of certainty, but there is something missing here. There is no 100% certainty. We know that our scientific theories change in time. Some theories are accepted for centuries and then discarded, or radically modified. Modern science, beginning with Galileo, Copernicus, Kepler, and so on, is here an obvious witness to this fact. Science gives certainty, but not absolute. However, it is certainty which is, for scientific purposes, enough. And we don't have to follow Hume in discarding the inductive method of thinking, because then science simply is falling to pieces. If, as Hume contends, I can only know what is given so far in time to me, but I have never certainty, I can never know whether the next A shall be joined to B or not, then my thinking is almost radically reduced to sheer guessing. And the whole edifice of modern scientific development is somehow in the air, so to speak. David Hume had a very durable influence. Even in our times, there are many people who accepted the Humean view. In practice, they, of course, live not by Humean views, but by the beliefs which traditionally are the domain of philosophy. In other words, by the principles of being that exists, that what is cannot at the same time, in the same respect, not be, or the principle of rejection of contradiction. 3, by the principle of sufficient reason. Every effect, every phenomenon, every happening must be intelligible, and therefore must, under analysis, display sufficient reason why it became, why it happened, why this being, this effect, this change took place. And finally, that the human mind is not only receiver, but an active analyzer of what is given, and that what is given on the occasion of senses is the discovery of being and the nature and different degrees of being and reality. Human thinking, therefore, is not a permanent delusion coming from who knows what. It is a solid leader, a direction, and absolutely can be compared perhaps to a stream of light. When I enter a dark room, let's say, where there are furniture, there are all kinds of things there, tables, chairs, and whatnot. When there is no light, I don't see. But if I have a flashlight, a powerful flashlight, in the stream of this light, things become now visible, present to my observation. This is only an analogy, but the human mind is somehow like this strong beam of light. And in the area, under the influence of light, of the power of the human mind, things, reality, beings, existences, natures, and causes, absolute and final and contingent, possible beings and actual beings and so on, come into awareness of the knowing subject. The existence of the self is, of course, immediate, direct datum to everyone. Anyone can just take a minute or two to realize that he feels, he is there, he is bored, he knows or not, or doubts. Something like Descartes, who even tried to somehow prove his own existence. And as we remember, the fundamental datum in Cartesianism is the fact that I think. It's not only there is thinking, but I think. Therefore, I must exist. People who are 80, 90, and so on, even perhaps 100, remember their, quite often, the first years of their childhood, the first experiences in school and high school, and later on the job, events, people with whom they were dealing, their disappointments, their joys, and so on, their creativity. And they know that this is real. It is really their life. It is not some sort of fleeting chain of stream of sense data. Even if I'm old man, I remember almost in detail many years and events, happenings, circumstances, and so on in my life. And there is no doubt, and the doubt is impossible here. Of course, I can lose my self-identity in my mind, because I am also not only mind, spiritual being, but I am also a body. And the body is necessary for me to function. There is a mutual relationship between the physical and the non-physical, spiritual, the self, the me, the mind also. So when the body, which to a great extent is a tool of the mind, refuses its functioning, I also may fall into the darkness of oblivion. I may lose my consciousness. This possibility is open, not because my self is not existing, but myself may be deprived of the necessary tools, the necessary means to perform its sound, mental, self-aware thinking function. David Hume should be considered by anyone who is seriously taking philosophy, should be analyzed, and each person must come to his or her own conclusion here. It, however, seems obvious that the primary assumption that only sense data are there, nothing else, that there is no self, that there is no causality, that induction is unjustified in logic, that we cannot even know whether there is an outside universe existing. All those assumptions are assumptions. In other words, they flow from the dogmatic statement at the very beginning of Hume's philosophy. Only sense perceptions exist. Paradoxically, we would have to say that in Humean philosophy, what is man? Let's say, man is a bundle of perceptions. But then, there is no personality. There is no self. There is no discovery, thought, knowledge. There is no self-awareness. A bundle of perceptions somehow is following another bundle of perceptions from outside. This is definitely an erroneous picture of reality. Hume made a very deep mistakes and a number of blunders. The next very influential thinker, Immanuel Kant, was very much influenced by the philosopher David Hume. And he developed his own vision of reality, his own philosophy, Kantianism, which we shall discuss in our next lecture. Kant said that under the influence of David Hume, he was awakened from his metaphysical slumber. That's a very bold statement. We shall see that the influence of Hume made Kant build a system which lacks to a great extent the obvious data of everyday knowledge and experience too.